Good afternoon and welcome to ThinkTech Asia. It's Tuesday, June 30th, 2015, and I'm your host, Keith Bettinger. We're really happy to be back after a hiatus from being in the field, and I want to thank the chairman of ThinkTech, Jay Fidel, for speaking to the warden of Halava on my behalf and getting me a furlough so I can get out and do the show. But a little later on today's program, we'll be welcoming our guest, Saiful Momen, who joins us in ThinkTech's palatial news studio here in downtown Honolulu, Hawaii, in the center of the Pacific Ocean and the world in general. Saiful joins us from the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, where he is putting the very finishing touches on his doctoral dissertation. So today we're going to be discussing the fascinating topic of social and economic development in the context of Bangladesh, which as a country faces some pressing challenges, but which has also been the site of tremendous innovation and success when it comes to lifting people out of poverty and improving development indicators. So we're happy you could join us today, and again, we're happy to be back here at ThinkTech Asia from hiatus. Today's program is sure to be a blockbuster. So fortunately, in addition to our live stream, it will be uploaded to YouTube later today so you can watch it over and over again to make sure you don't miss out on any of the brilliant insights that are certain to emerge from our discussion. So as always, if you have any Asia-related events to publicize, please contact me at keiththinktech@gmail.com. Or you can also send me questions and comments directly via Twitter, and we'll cover these on the program at KCC Geography. Again, that's at KCC Geography. That's my Twitter address here at the program. So now on to our weekly news summary of unfolding events around Asia and Southeast Asia. Our news summary begins this week with a story from Myanmar, which this past week passed an incredible development milestone, speaking of development, when the country's first fast food restaurant, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, opened in Yangon. The opening of the restaurant had been in the works for more than a year and is part of KFC's efforts to push into 118 countries. The chain now has more than 14,000 restaurants in emerging markets, including India, China, and Bolivia. The current endeavor in Myanmar is a joint venture between KFC parent company, Yum! Brands, and Yoma Strategic Holdings, a Singapore-listed company belonging to Myanmar real estate tycoon Serge Pun. The arrival of the restaurant signals broader changes in the country, which is opening up after years of oppressive rule by a harsh totalitarian military junta. Analysts say that even the event marks a shift in tastes and consumer demands in Burma and is a harbinger of broader changes to come. The middle class in Burma is expected to grow more than 700% over the next 15 years, but the current market for whole cuisine like KFC may be limited, given that the average salary in Yangon is about $180 a month. The British Broadcasting Company, or BBC, commented on the changes, noting that the rustic, crumbling country that tourists love so much may not be here for much longer. So if you'd like to follow KFC's adventures in Myanmar, you can like their Facebook page at KFC Myanmar. Now in East Asia, where we return to a story we've been following before we were exiled from the internet, this week the People's Republic of China hosted the signing ceremony for the new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, a new PRC-led multilateral financial institution that is set to compete against the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and others in the multi-billion-dollar industry that is international development. The goal of the AIIB is to channel money to energy, transportation, and infrastructure projects in Asia with concessionary loans. Analysts say the founding of the bank is not just a diplomatic coup for the PRC, which is expanding its global profile, but also is an economic win too, since the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank will essentially lend money to countries so that they can pay Chinese companies to build infrastructure projects. Although the US and Japan have not joined, 49 countries from Asia, Europe, and the Middle East have, including the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, and South Korea. The AIIB starts off with an initial capitalization of $50 billion, which will eventually be increased to $100 billion, with China as the largest shareholder at just over 30%. Now, according to the rules of the new institution, this would give China just over 20%, 6% of the voting rights, with India coming in second as the second biggest shareholder at between 10 and 15%. So China will obviously have a significant say as to where the institution will invest its money. The country had complained that its minuscule voting rights in other multilateral institutions like the World Bank is not equivalent to its growing economic and political clout. Chinese Foreign Minister Liu Jiwei said that the new institution could begin dispersing loans by the end of 2015. Now in South Asia, the death toll from an ongoing heat wave in Pakistan topped 1,200 people, according to government officials. Hospitals in Pakistan's largest city, Karachi, treated approximately 65,000 heat stroke victims over the course of a week. The heat wave, which has affected Sindh province, has coincided with the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, a time where the faithful observe a month-long fast from dawn until dusk. Temperatures reached as high as 45 degrees Celsius, which is approximately equivalent to 113 degrees Fahrenheit last week, as the country experienced chronic power outages, forcing many residents to spend the night outside. According to reports, poorer residents, including the homeless, were especially hard hit by the heat wave. The Pakistani Taliban warned that if the power failures continued, they would take action against K Electric, the private company that supplies electricity to Karachi. No word on what those actions would be. The heat wave comes just weeks after Pakistan's neighbor, India, suffered through a similar event that killed more than 2,000 people. The heat waves are raising concerns that South Asia is experiencing the impacts of global warming and that the situation will be worse in coming years. Okay, now today on the program we're going to be looking at the socio-economic development and the challenges associated with raising the living standards of the poorest of the poor. Development, as we mentioned earlier, is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and for decades, countries of the global north have been attempting to help developing countries. Development economics and development thinking have gone through a number of phases through the years, but many of the most exciting initiatives and most creative initiatives and ideas have turned out to be colossal failures. Why is the global divide between the rich and the poor so intractable? Is it possible to end poverty, malnutrition, and other forms of suffering related to socioeconomic inequality? To address these questions, we're going to turn to Bangladesh, a country facing some of the most difficult challenges in the world. Joining us in the studio today to discuss this topic is Saiful Momen. Now, Saiful Momen is a PhD candidate. Welcome to the program, by the way.
Thank
Is
you.
a PhD candidate in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning here at Manoa. He has, in his own word, dabbled in a number of fields, a number of areas within the field, such as, again, in his own words, old school urban planning, transportation planning, spatial quantitative analysis. What made our program, what made us decide to interview Saiful was his dissertation research, which focuses on rural regional development and its publications in urban policy in Bangladesh, rural livelihoods, and rural regional development. Saiful is an avid sports person. He has won the intramural table tennis tournament here at the University of Hawaii a few times and can claim to have actually earned money from his sporting endeavors. So that makes you a professional athlete, yeah?
In some ways.
So
yes.
welcome to the program. You know, before we start, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how important this program is. I did some informal market research this past week, and it turns out now in the world today there are 3 billion internet users. 3 billion, yeah? And so to think about this program, how many of those people are watching this program as it streams online right now? And there's no way to really know. We can't know, but I think that a good conservative estimate as to how many of those people are watching that, I figure about 10%, yeah? So 10% of 3 billion is 300 million people. Okay. So there's 300 million people that are most likely watching this program right now.
Okay.
So
that's a conservative estimate.
Yeah, it's conservative. It could be much more than that, yeah?
Definitely.
So we have a good audience today for this discussion. Now, the first thing I wanted to talk about, that we had a conversation about this before the program. In the news lately, we've been hearing a lot about the Rohingyas in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and this refugee crisis. And as we were talking earlier, you mentioned that it's a little bit more complex than that, right? This has gotten a lot of press, but it's not just the Rohingyas that are are experiencing difficulties in their migration from Burma, but there's Bangladeshis that are involved in that too. So could you tell us a little bit just about give us a status report about what's going on before we get into the driving effects of that, yeah?
Well, what's happening is that we don't have the numbers, but there is a mix of people on those boats.
Yeah.
Of course, the Rohingyas are there, and that's what is getting most of the press. But there are a lot of people from Bangladesh who are being termed as economic migrants. And for the smugglers who are smuggling people to mostly Malaysia, it's just economies of scale. They can bring in more people from across the border, which is Bangladesh, and they have the same destination, which is Malaysia. So on those boats, nobody has exact numbers, but there are people from both countries.
Well, can you give us an order of magnitude? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands? Tens of thousands?
Well, the number that was given a few weeks ago was that around 6,000 people were floating around on those
total.
Yeah, on those rickety boats.
Sure.
We don't know, and I haven't seen any number that actually establishes what proportion of them are Bangladeshis and what proportion of them are Rohingyas.
Yeah.
But there is a mix, definitely.
Right. So now the Rohingyas are coming from Burma, from Myanmar, and there are a number of political, religious push factors that are forcing them to flee, and so we might consider them to be asylum seekers, refugees. The folks from Bangladesh, however, are moving for different reasons. Yeah. So can you tell us what is the push factor that's pushing them to leave their homes and in these very perilous circumstances and try to make it to Malaysia or elsewhere in the world?
Well, one thing we know is that they are not the poorest of the poor.
They are not.
They are not. Generally, I mean, in migration literature, I'm sure you're familiar with that, it's not generally the poorest of the poor who migrate, because they cannot even put together the resources to make the passage to a territory a few thousand miles away. So these are not the poorest of the poor, and the interviews of them, well, information about them is only now beginning to emerge. And I was reading one interview of one person in a relatively prosperous part of the country. And he went because some of his neighbors went. And he was young, in his late teens. He left without much information.
So what was he leaving behind?
He was...
what is your typical migrant leaving behind?
Again, these are people who do not keep a database, basically, right? There is not a population of them listed somewhere from which you draw sample and start asking. So this is a group that is for the official migrants, like who go through government channels. You can track them down and basically you can interview them. For the people who are being called unauthorized or illegal migrants, there is no such database. But journalists, basically we depend on our media, the journalists, to inform us about them. And what is emerging, and it's only been a few weeks, so it's only been emerging. People are only beginning to probably turn in their reports, the journalists. What I have seen is that, again, that confirms the migration literature. These are not the poorest of the poor, and a lot of times ill-informed. A lot of times they are following precedents. Like people from their area succeeded in settling down in Malaysia, and probably they are sending large enough amounts to make their family be able to build concrete homes.
So does the Rohingyas are being pushed by socio-economic or by political dynamics in Burma right now, and that's not happening in Bangladesh. So does the fact that the Bangladeshis are migrating, does that predate the Rohingyas? So it's just an ongoing issue, or are they just migrating because a market has emerged, a human trafficking market has emerged in response to the Rohingya demand?
Well, that's a good question, actually. In fact, Bangladeshis started migrating to Malaysia on a larger scale, and as early as 1990s. And you know, Malaysian economy had grew really fast in early 90s. They had like growth rate of 9% or so throughout the early 90s until the Asian recession in 97, 98. So there was a lot of building in Malaysia in those years.
Yes.
They had like a few dozen hospitals, and at the end of that period, they had a few hundred hospitals, like the schools, I mean, everything. There was a lot of construction activity going on. So they needed labor, and also they needed labor in the service sector. So a lot of Bangladeshis, for Bangladeshis, it was a new destination.
So there's a traditional relationship there. Yeah. Malaysia has been a destination for a while.
Well, actually, the tradition is stronger with the Middle Eastern Arab countries.
Oh, yeah.
Since late 60s, Bangladeshi male, especially almost exclusively males, have been finding work as in temporary assignments in Arab countries. And people without much knowledge of geography basically knew Saudi Arabia to be to include Qatar, Oman, Yemen, and all those countries. So it was basically Saudi Arabia. So when Malaysia came up in early 90s, mid 90s as a destination, you could hear people asking, like, where in Saudi Arabia is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back in just a moment and continue this discussion of economic migrants from Bangladesh. This is ThinkTech Asia. We'll be back in just a minute. Yes, thank you for joining us.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevelin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Hello, welcome back to ThinkTech Asia. I'm your host, Keith Bettinger, and we're talking today about economic development and migration and other topics in Bangladesh and South Asia. And we're joined by Saiful Momen. I almost said doctor, close to being doctor, yeah? Near doctor.
Fingers crossed.
And we're going to continue our discussion in just a moment. This is just a reminder, if you have comments or questions that you'd like to direct at us while we're live, you can send a tweet. You can tweet to @KCCGeography. Again, that's @KCCGeography, and we're happy to have you join into our discussion here in the studio. So now let's get back to the economic migrants. And before we went to break, we were talking about the traditional out-migration from Bangladesh to the Arabian Peninsula to work in construction, and then to Malaysia in the 90s. And this migration is, well, there's push-pull factors and pull factors. The pull factors we've talked about already. Those are the ones that get the migrants to pull the migrants, yeah? In Malaysia, you mentioned that it was the economic boom of the 1990s. And presumably the migration started to end, temporarily anyway, in the late 1990s when the Asian financial crisis set in. So those are pull factors. There's opportunities abroad. What are some of the push factors that were in Bangladesh?
Well, there will be no one factor, right?
Yeah.
But I think I'll start with the environment and ecology there. There are, of course, other factors, the institutions, governance, and all those. As you know, except for Singapore and some other city-states, Bangladesh is the most dense country in the world.
Mhm.
So there are 142 million people in a country of 148,000 square kilometers, of
Yeah.
56 or so thousand square miles. It's very dense. Almost 60% of its land is being cultivated. 60% of
60%, wow.
of that land. And by the way, for comparison, for the sake of comparison, for the whole globe,
Mhm.
it is 35% or so. Even when you include the pastures, like for livestock, it's only 35%. In Bangladesh, it's already 60% of the land is
Wow.
being cultivated, and the agricultural land is shrinking. Because, and not because it's going back to forest or natural use, but settlement, industries, infrastructure,
Urbanization.
and urbanization. In a single word, urbanization probably. So because of that urbanization, the agricultural land is shrinking. The country has like more than 10% of the rural population is absolutely landless,
Mhm.
and most are small farmers. So there is not much land to cultivate, and it's historically an agrarian society. So
Mhm.
people depending on land to provide for themselves. I mean, of course, there are a lot of non-agricultural occupations that are in the rural areas, but it has been characterized as an agrarian society, and agrarian societies have a lot of non-agricultural occupations to sustain it. So the sources in nature for providing for people through agriculture are not many. So people have always migrated from this part of this world.
Sure.
And what has added to all this is that while the cities are growing, the proper is not the right word to use, but I'll use it for the lack of any better word. The sources of livelihood there in the big cities are not there. So what has been called informal sector,
Yeah.
which is not a very good term to use probably, but I'll use it. In the informal sector, people are finding they're eking out a livelihood. It's not even a livelihood. So our urban poverty is increasing. Rural poverty is being pushed out into urban areas, and
I see.
some of that poverty is being pushed out into other countries too.
Mhm.
People who can put together enough resources, they are going to these other countries.
So one of the
So-
basic issues then is that the cities in Bangladesh, Chittagong, Dhaka, are not able to absorb the influx of people moving from the countryside.
Yeah, and well, the garment sector, the well-known garment sector in Bangladesh, they are bringing in people, but mostly females.
Mhm.
And for the males, there are jobs being created in the construction, and the economy is expanding and relatively fast, at least faster than a decade ago.
Wow.
So that is happening, but still, given the population density, given agriculture's inability to employ more,
Right.
people have to find sources of livelihood elsewhere.
Sure.
And it's being pursued internationally.
Mhm. So now, one of the things that you just mentioned how agricultural land Bangladesh is losing agricultural land, and you mentioned urbanization, factories, and things like the land conversion, essentially. One factor that you didn't mention that we usually think about with Bangladesh is sea level rise, because it's vulnerable to that. But I was really intrigued by a conversation that we had before the show. You mentioned a phenomenon that I had no idea was actually taking place there in the mouths of the Ganges. And that's the actual creation of land. I suppose it's sedimentary deposits from the river. And so Bangladesh actually has new territory that's being created by the tremendous outflow of the Ganges rivers there. Now, what you told me about, you started to describe, because it is obviously very fertile, right? Because it's alluvium.
Yes.
What you started to tell me about is how this land gets parceled out and how it gets made productive. So maybe could you talk a little bit about that process there?
Definitely. I mean, yeah. One of the things you learn in the first class in land economics is that
Sure.
it's in limited supply, right?
Right.
But no, apparently Bangladesh has 1,000 square kilometers of new land since 1973.
Wow.
That's the net gain. I mean, there has been erosion along the major rivers.
That's a net gain.
That's
So
a net
even
gain.
with sea level rise,
Yeah.
even with erosion and like that, there's 1,000 square kilometers that have been added. Wow,
Yes.
that's amazing.
Yeah, and actually the erosion, you were asking what pushes people out. Erosion is actually one of the factors that historically has displaced people, and many of them have found, many of them moved to big cities.
They do. So now, but you had mentioned though that when this new land is created, it's automatically the property of the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is there any effort or is there any mechanism for the people that are losing land from erosion to have that land replaced by the new land that's being created by deposition from the Ganges River?
Well, we have to take a step back, I believe.
All right.
The government's policy is that any land that rises out of water is government land, irrespective of who owned it before in that location. That's the current law, and it's been like that since 1972.
Since Bangladesh became independent, basically.
Soon after Bangladesh became independent, yeah. So the land is government land, and what does the government do with it? The policy is to parcel this land out to landless people. And there is one area of the country that I studied, the southern part of the country, where I spent 3 months in that area. The idea was that, and that's where most of the accretion occurred. The idea was that government would parcel this land out to landless people. Initially, they tried to give the title of the land to cooperatives, so it was kind of communal ownership. That didn't quite work out because most of the people were from different parts of the district, not quite country, but from district, and they didn't live in the same neighborhood before. They're not related. They're not from the. They don't have the blood relationship. So they didn't have the what is called social capital. Though I don't like to use the term, so the cooperatives didn't quite work out. So by late 80s, they had a policy of actually giving land to individuals, the landless people. So one of the interesting things, I think what you're also trying to get at is that giving land to people, 1 acre lots, 1.5 acre lots, or in some areas 2 acre lots.
Acres, not hectares, but acres.
Not hectares. Yeah, hectare is like 2.5 times.
Yeah, right.
Roughly 2.5 times. So it was acres. So government had that policy, and they apparently pursued it, at least on paper. So now I think somebody visiting from outside is perfectly okay to ask, like, this area must have a society, an economy where there are a lot of well-to-do peasants, and they would expect the prosperity that is found in such egalitarian societies, a relative prosperity. People have purchasing power, and there is an economy that goes on there.
Right.
But actually, that didn't happen. That didn't happen because there was a lot of the local elites, landed elite, they found a way, repeatedly they found a way to capture those land. One of the most interesting ways that I think you will find interesting as an international scholar is the declaration of shrimp zones, and I'll explain to you. And
the what?
Shrimp zones.
Oh, okay.
I'll explain it to you. And this shows you how international global economy, global trade can get translated in a very undesirable way.
Sure.
in local area. So what happened was that in 1992, European Union and to a lesser extent North America opened up for Bangladeshi shrimp. And so the government found this, on top of garments industry, this promised to be a export sector. So the government preferentially started giving land to land leases in 30-acre lots
Wow.
to these entrepreneurs, aquaculture
And this included the
entrepreneurs.
new land.
And this also included the new land.
So presumably you would have to have some level of capitalization to take advantage of that, right?
Correct.
So that you can invest and build a shrimp farm.
Exactly. So
Wow.
that invites people with money, basically, entrepreneurs with enough money.
So they changed, the policy changed from one that prioritized people that, landless people, to those that had some startup capital.
Yeah, but I have to clarify this thing. They didn't give all of this land to
Shrimpers.
these
Okay,
aquaculturists.
well, let's pick up there, and this is really fascinating, because
Okay,
land
that-
reform according to the theory anyway, land reform is supposed to be one of the first steps to economic development, right? Giving people access to the means of production, or one of the factors of production. And we'll pick up there in just a moment. We have to take a break, so
Sure.
we're going to show a couple of PSAs here. Again, this is ThinkTech Asia. We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? At Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
Okay, welcome back to ThinkTech Asia. I'm your host, Keith Bettinger. Our Twitter address here, in case you want to join us in the studio for a riveting and fascinating discussion about development in Bangladesh, is KCC Geography, at KCC Geography. So this is ThinkTech Asia. I know you've missed us. We're back after like 6 weeks going. We're happy to have as our first guest back Saiful Momen, and we've been talking about Bangladesh. And before we went to break, we were talking about how globalization is really kind of the local level impacts it's had in the Delta region in Bangladesh, where new land is actually being created by the deposition of alluvium from the Ganges River. New land is actually created there, which becomes a property of the government. And the original idea, this is a noble idea, is that the government is going to parcel this land out in 1 acre, 2 acre parcels to poor people that don't have any land, people that don't have any access to the factors of production. Now, according to orthodox development economics, that's one of the first building blocks to getting people out of poverty, is to give them access to the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. In this case, land, right? However, what you mentioned is that international developments in trade, and specifically in shrimp, led to a change in policy in Bangladesh whereby people that had some access to capital and could invest in shrimp farms were given preferential access to some of this land.
Correct.
And so we see that a program that is meant to benefit the poorest of the poor ends up benefiting people that don't need the help as much, right? So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about where that stands now.
Well, it's been 2 decades already since that policy was taken up. So
Since the shrimp policy was taken.
as the shrimp policy was taken up, and the impacts are already on the ground. A lot has, and it's pretty well known. What has happened is that in the western part of the country, where actually shrimp aquaculture actually happened, there's been a tremendous loss because of the intrusion of salinity in the productivity of other crops. and the chemical properties of the soil have changed in a lot of areas.
Wow.
And a lot of struggle, a lot of times violent, has happened in those parts. The area I studied didn't see much aquaculture at all, and much shrimp production at all, because it's not saline enough, apparently. So it was just a vehicle for the rich to grab land,
Right.
to get the land from the government.
So are they now? Are these landed elites? Are they manipulating the system, or are they buying land from people that are granted title to the land?
They did both.
Mhm.
They did both. In the 80s, when actually the title was given to a couple, both husband and wife, they were not barred from selling what they were given.
Right.
Initially, there was a bar of 15 years. Now now they cannot sell it within 99 years. But initially, there was no such restriction. So they were getting the land,
I see.
right away, they knew that within 10 years they were going to hand it over to the big, powerful guy with a lot of muscle power. And in the absence of the state, like the police department and law enforcement, a lot of informal, you could call it security arrangements appear.
Wow.
Institutions of security arrangement appear. So people who are really powerful there, they have access to these resources.
So it seems like then what the lesson here is that it's not just about giving people access to the factors of production like land, but it's also in creating a social and institutional environment where they can flourish once they're given access to these factors of production, right?
I mean,
so you have to create kind of you have to safeguard their property, basically, yeah, from these informal processes whereby people are, where they lose their land, basically, right?
Yeah, but it's always been so hard to ensure that around the world, not just in Bangladesh. I mean, the only successful cases of land reform are some East Asian countries, Taiwan, Korea, part of West Bengal too. But they all happened in the 50s, which was soon after Second World War. There were major upheavals, and in the cases of Taiwan and South Korea, a lot of land was basically owned by the Japanese, and when they left the country, they could be distributed.
Sure.
But in the case of Bangladesh, in Norman peace times, there are land elites. You cannot just confiscate land from them that easily. It's been tried in Bangladesh, actually in the 50s,
Yeah.
again in the 70s, and again in the late 80s, actually.
Well, it's difficult to
It's-
do that. That
it is-
expropriation
that
doesn't
expropriation.
really have a very good history.
Yeah.
Now, another topic of development in Bangladesh, we talk about the challenges, but most people they think about Bangladesh as being a poor country with a lot of difficulties, but most people don't realize that Bangladesh has given rise to some of the most revolutionary thinking in terms of bringing people up out of poverty. And one kind of hero of economic development we know that's from Bangladesh, Muhammad Yunus, who was a Nobel laureate and won the Nobel Prize for economics, but he also founded the Grameen Bank. And the Grameen Bank is, as we know, it's a micro-lending institution. And so Muhammad Yunus's idea was to fill a market failure that he observed, whereby financial institutions were not making investment capital available to poor people because of the transaction costs. So he developed the Grameen Bank as a way to address that market failure. And it was a tremendous success. This microfinance, microcredit has been replicated throughout the world. In virtually every country, even in the US, there's microcredit. Now, another thing that Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank did a few years ago, and I remember when they rolled out this innovation, was to make cell phones available to one person or two people in these rural villages in Bangladesh. The idea being that it could be a micro enterprise, but it also would provide conduit for information, market information for farmers in a village. And this was really a lauded, it was a very highly heralded innovation. And I understand that you have done some research into the effects of this village cell phone program. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about
Well,
that.
I actually didn't specifically study the village phone ladies, as they're
phone ladies, yes,
as they're often called. I didn't study them, but I generally, and I was much too late for it. I did my study in only a few years ago, but the phone ladies came along in 90s, and actually, by the time I did my study, there were basically whole the country was under cell phone coverage, and not just by one company, basically by different operators. There's a big, there are 3 or 4 major companies there. So the phone ladies kind of phased out because because they're not very relevant anymore now that everyone has a cell phone in their pocket.
Right.
So what I set out to study was the role of information. Now that the cell phones could be used to have market information, information about input pricing, about the price of produces at distant markets. Now that these are available, what's the impact of that? That is what I set out to study. What I found was that, and also when I did my study, the remitting money via cell phone, like in Kenya there was a successful program, M-Pesa. Bangladesh has that program. Where you can sell money. If you're a rickshaw puller in the big city, you can send money to your family within a few minutes.
Wow.
And a recent study showed that 76% of rickshaw pullers basically use that service. So, but I did my study before this came, right before they a company started selling this service over phone. So I was interested in the use of information and how that impacted people's livelihoods. Long ago, not long ago actually, 9 years or so ago, there was an award-winning ad on Bangladesh TV that showed a fisherman selling his catch, and he was prompted to sell his catch at a very low price to a local fish trader. And the fish trader was telling him, hey, the price is really low in the city market today. And then the fisherman, he pulls out his cell phone from his pocket. He checks the price.
That's another market failure that's being addressed.
Yeah,
right?
that was an award-winning ad. So information solves it.
Yeah.
Like it brings him the fair deal, right?
Right.
But what I found in my study is that unless you can actually market your fish in the city market, unless you can do that, unless you own a transport,
Right.
or you're part of a cooperative to take your produce to the big market, that information is not very useful. And actually one person I interviewed told me, what's the point of having information?
If you cannot take advantage of it.
If you cannot
Sure.
take advantage
So
of
the information is just one step in a bigger puzzle, yeah?
Yes, it
What
probably,
are some of the other pieces?
what I found was that people there are some kind of feudal institutions, semi-feudal institutions in not only in Bangladesh, in many other parts of the country, much like Middle Age Europe. There are institutions like that. One particular institution is that the lending, in the absence of formal banks, you borrow money from rich landlords, people with money in your area, and the interest rates
Too much.
are too much.
Yeah.
Not anything like the U.S. banks.
Sure.
So, and also you are contractually obligated to sell your produce or whatever you are catching or whatever you are producing, and you have to market it via that person.
Sure.
So you cannot negotiate the price. So you're losing in a lot of ways.
I see.
You're paying a high rate, and also you're not you cannot negotiate the price of your produce.
So it's a bigger picture than just the information. There's a lot of
Yeah.
other institutional pieces that need to fall into place in order to improve opportunities for rural people in Bangladesh. Yeah.
I think that would be a good assessment.
Yeah. Well, all right. Thank you very much. I told you, we're at the end of our clock here. I told you that the time was just going to fly because it feels like we were talking for about 5 minutes.
Yeah,
And,
it
if
did
we
fly.
feel-
It did.
well, it does go tempus fugit, as the Romans say. We could talk more and more. Hopefully, we can have you back on the program at some point in the future. We can expand our
I'd love to be back.
discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you again for being here today. So that's it for ThinkTech. And so we thank you for joining us, and I know that we've learned a lot. I want to express a very special mahalo to my guest, Saiful Momen, Thank you again for being here today.
Thanks for
I
the
also
invite.
want to express my appreciation to everyone here at the studio, Jay, Zuri, and Sachi for making this show possible. We hope you'll join us again next week at 4 p.m. for another exciting episode of ThinkTech Asia. Mahalo, aloha, and ahui ho. See you next week.